The coffee was still hot when I walked out onto the back porch and looked out at the water. My lake house sat on 3 acres just outside Gatlinburg, Tennessee, tucked between old oak trees and a stretch of shoreline that caught the morning light like copper. I had bought it 6 months earlier, paid in full, and not once since then had I woken up with a knot in my chest. That feeling alone, that simple, quiet absence of dread, was worth more to me than the property itself. I was 63 years old. I had a cup of good coffee, a dog named Chester, sleeping at my feet, and a bank account that would have shocked every single person who had ever underestimated me. And there had been plenty of them. I had not always lived like this. 17 years ago, I was a carpenter in Murfreesboro with a small shop, a modest house, and what I believed was a close family. My son Derek was in his late 20s then, and he had just married a woman named Nicole. She was sharp-looking, well-spoken, and carried herself like someone who had already decided where she was going and intended to let nothing stand in her way. I told myself that confidence. I told myself ambition. I was wrong on both counts. The first year was fine. The second year, things began to shift in ways I could not quite name. Derek stopped calling as often. As life, as often will man. When I visited, Nicole would find reasons to keep the conversation short, or she would leave the room in a way that somehow ended the visit entirely. Small things. The kind of thing you dismiss once, twice, a dozen times, because you do not want to believe what your instincts are telling you. By the third year, Derek told me flatly that Nicole felt I was too involved in their lives. I had no idea what that meant. I had not been involved at all. I showed up for birthdays. I helped Derek fix his gutters once. I called on Sundays. That, apparently, was too much. Nicole's version of a good father-in-law was one who existed at a comfortable distance and asked for nothing in return. I tried to adjust. I called less. I visited less. I kept my opinions to myself, even when Derek mentioned things that worried me. Money problems. Arguments. Nicole's habit of spending well beyond what they earned. I said nothing. I was trying to be respectful. It did not matter. One afternoon, Derek drove to my shop alone and told me that Nicole had given him an ultimatum. It was her or me. He could not have both of us in his life. He had thought it over, he said. He was choosing his marriage. I remember standing there with sawdust on my hands, looking at my son, and not recognizing the man in front of me. He would not meet my eyes. He stared at the floor of my shop the way a child does when he knows he is doing something wrong but has decided to do it anyway. I asked him one question. I asked him if he was sure. He said yes. I did not beg. I did not argue. I told him I loved him, and I told him my door would always be open. And then I watched him walk out of my shop and drive away. That was in October. By Christmas, I had not heard from him again. What Nicole did not know, what neither of them knew, was that Derek's departure did not break me. It gutted me. Yes, there were nights in those first years when the silence of my house felt like a physical weight pressing down on my ribs. I grieved my son the way you grieve someone who is still alive and simply chooses not to know you. It is a particular kind of grief that has no ceremony, no casseroles from neighbors, no one telling you how sorry they are. You just carry it. But I was still a man who knew how to work. I took everything I had felt, the grief, the anger, the long, quiet nights, and I put it into my craft. I had always made furniture, but I began making furniture differently, better. I started studying wood the way some men study scripture, learning the grain of every species, the way walnut moves differently than cherry, the way white oak holds a finish. I hired 2 young men who were hungry to learn. I took commissions from restaurants and hotels in Nashville. I built a reputation that spread, slowly at first and then quickly, the way fire spreads when the conditions are right. 8 years after Derek walked out of my shop, a furniture company out of Atlanta offered to buy my business. I negotiated hard. I sold it for enough money that I spent 3 days after signing simply sitting in my backyard trying to understand that the number was real. I did not announce it. I did not post anything online. I moved to Gatlinburg, bought the lake house, and began the retirement I had earned. For a while, the quiet was everything I needed. Then one Tuesday morning in late April, my phone rang, and the number on the screen was Derek's. I stared at it for a long moment. Chester lifted his head from the floor and looked at me, the way dogs do when they sense something has changed in the room. I let it ring twice more. Then I answered, "Dad." His voice was the same and not the same. Older, something worn down in it. "Derek," I said. There was a pause. "I heard you sold the business." I did not ask how he heard. In small enough circles, news travels without being sent. "I did," I said. Another pause. "Nicole and I were wondering if we could come visit, see the new place." I noticed he said Nicole and I. Not I. Not I missed you, Dad. Not I'm sorry. For 17 years of nothing. Nicole and I. "Sure," I said. "Come on up this weekend." I hung up and sat for a while with my coffee and thought about what was coming. I was not naive. I knew exactly what this visit was about. 17 years of silence, and the call came 6 weeks after the sale closed. The timing was not a coincidence. It was a calculation. I called my attorney that afternoon. Her name was Patricia, and she was the best in Knoxville. I told her what was happening, and asked her to help me understand my options. I also called an old friend named Marcus, who had spent 20 years doing private investigation work before he retired. What I did not tell Derek or Nicole was that I had a granddaughter. Her name was Lily. She was 15 years old, and she was Derek's daughter from before he married Nicole. Her mother had passed away when Lily was 3, and Derek had been raising her alone until Nicole came into the picture. Lily had reached out to me 2 years earlier on her own, through Facebook of all things. She had written me a message that I have read so many times I have memorized it. She said she had always known she had a grandfather out there. She said her dad did not talk about me much, but she had found some old photos in a box. She said she did not want to cause any trouble. She just wanted to know if I was real. I wrote her back within 5 minutes. We had been talking regularly ever since, always carefully, always without Derek or Nicole knowing. Lily was sharp, funny, and had her grandmother's eyes, my late wife's eyes. She was also, I had come to understand slowly and with growing dread, living in a house where Nicole treated her like an inconvenience that had been inherited along with the marriage. "Nothing dramatic enough to report," Lily always said. Nicole never hit her. She just made Lily feel invisible in a way that had its own kind of damage. Nicole picked at her grades, her friends, her appearance, the way she laughed too loud. Derek, for his part, had become so accustomed to agreeing with Nicole that he had stopped noticing what he was agreeing to. I had asked Marcus to look into the household before the visit. What Marcus found confirmed what I suspected. There were significant debts, the kind accumulated quietly through years of spending designed to look like success. 2 cars they could not afford. A house that had been refinanced twice. A pattern of Nicole contacting financial advisors to ask, in a roundabout way, what happened to assets when an elderly parent was declared unable to manage their own affairs. That last part I read 3 times. When Derek and Nicole arrived that Saturday, I watched them pull up the long gravel driveway from the front porch. They stepped out of the car, and I saw Nicole's eyes move across the property, the way an appraisers do, measuring, calculating, assigning value. She smiled when she reached the porch. It was a real smile, which made it worse somehow. "Raymond," she said, and hugged me like we were old friends. Derek hugged me too, and it was awkward the way long absences make everything awkward. Too careful. Too brief. "It's good to see you, Dad," he said, and I believed he meant it, and that made it complicated. I showed them the house. 3 bedrooms, a large living area that opened onto the back deck, the dock, extending out over the water. Nicole walked through each room with her hands clasped in front of her and made sounds of admiration that were designed to sound spontaneous. By the time we sat down on the deck with iced tea, she had already remarked twice on how much space there was for just one person. We talked about nothing important for the first hour. Derek asked about the business sale. In a casual way, That was not casual at all. I gave him general answers and changed the subject. Nicole watched the exchange the way someone watches a chess match where they have already decided how it ends. It was over dinner that she made her move. "You know," Nicole said, setting down her fork in that deliberate way she had, "Derek and I have been talking, and we feel terrible about the distance between you two. We really do. One. She looked at me with an expression of sincere concern that I imagined she had practiced. "We were thinking, and tell me if this is crazy, but with all this space, and with you being here alone, it might make sense for us to move in, just until we get back on our feet. We could take care of the property, keep you company." I looked at Derek. He was looking at his plate. "You'd have your privacy," Nicole continued. "We'd take the 2 guest rooms. Lily could have the smaller one. It would really just be—" "And Lily," I said. Nicole paused. A small falter, quickly recovered. "Yes, she'd come with us, of course." I nodded slowly. I made my face look like I was thinking it over. I had, in fact, already thought it over in considerable detail. "Let me sleep on it," I said. Nicole smiled. "Of course. Take all the time you need." I excused myself that evening, saying I was tired, and I went to my room and called Marcus. I told him what Nicole had said. Marcus told me what else he had found that week. The debt was worse than I had known. There was also a conversation Nicole had apparently had with a neighbor overheard accidentally, relayed to Marcus through sources I had learned not to ask about, in which Nicole described her plan to move in with her elderly father-in-law, get access to his finances by being helpful, and use that access to stabilize their situation before he got any older and things got complicated. She had used the word senile. She had said she expected he would go senile within a few years, and that by then it would not matter. I slept fine that night, which may say something about me. The next morning at breakfast, I told them yes. Nicole looked as though she had been holding her breath for 12 hours. "Oh, Raymond, that is wonderful. We'll be so good to you, I promise." Derek reached across the table and put his hand on mine for a brief moment. He was relieved too, but for different reasons, I thought. He had been managing Nicole for so long that having her relieved took pressure off him. He had stopped being able to separate her relief from his own. They moved in 3 weeks later. The first month was pleasant enough. Nicole was on her best behavior, which meant she was helpful and attentive in ways that occasionally felt like being studied. She reorganized my kitchen without asking, which I said nothing about. She began calling Patricia, my attorney, various things, your legal lady, that woman at the firm, and asked twice why I needed an attorney on retainer. I told her it was a holdover from running a business, and changed the subject both times. Lily arrived with 1 duffel bag and 2 boxes of books. She was taller than I had imagined from our conversations, with her grandmother's eyes exactly as I had remembered them in photographs. When Nicole went to bring in the rest of the car, Lily looked at me quickly and said, in a low voice, "She doesn't know we know each other." "I know," I said. "We'll keep it that way for now." "Okay," she said. Then, very quietly, "Thank you for letting me come." I had to look out the window for a moment before I could answer her. Living in the same house, I began to see what Lily had described more clearly. Nicole spoke to her the way you might speak to a dog that had never been properly trained. Not cruel, just dismissive. When Lily got a B+ on a paper she was proud of, Nicole glanced at it and said that was fine for now. When Lily mentioned wanting to take an AP class in the fall, Nicole said they would have to see about transportation, which both of us understood meant no. Derek noticed none of this, or told himself he didn't. In the second month, things began to move faster. Nicole started asking questions about the accounts, casual questions, woven into conversation. She offered to help manage my household bills. She began leaving printed brochures for assisted living facilities on the kitchen counter, which she explained away as something she had just come across. No reason, just something to think about eventually. She arranged for a doctor to come to the house, a friend of a friend, she said, for what she called a wellness check. The doctor asked me questions about memory and cognition that were not a wellness check. I answered every question correctly. Then I smiled at the doctor and told him Patricia would be in touch. Nicole spent the rest of that day very quiet. What she did not know was that Marcus had been documenting everything from outside for 6 weeks. He had documentation of the financial fraud they had been building, slowly accounts that Derek had been directed to open in both his and my name, paperwork Nicole had drafted twice, for power of attorney, on the pretense of protecting me, and a conversation, captured on audio in a way that was legal in Tennessee, in which Nicole told Derek that if his father became difficult, they could move to have him assessed, and she knew someone at a care facility who would help them with the paperwork. Derek's response on that recording was 4 words: "Let's not rush it." I played that recording once, late at night, and did not play it again. Some things you only need to hear once to understand fully. I had been planning the gathering for weeks. I called it a housewarming, told Nicole it was a chance to meet the neighbors, and watched her immediately begin thinking about how to use it. She offered to organize it herself. I said that was very kind of her and let her do it. She invited 40 people. I quietly arranged for Patricia to attend, along with 2 of her colleagues, and a man from the sheriff's department I had spoken to after sharing Marcus's documentation. I also, the night before, sat down on the back porch with Lily and told her everything. She sat very still while I talked. When I finished, she looked at the water for a long time. "What's going to happen to my dad?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "That depends on some choices he makes very soon." "Do you think he knew everything she was doing?" I thought about the recording. I thought about those 4 words. "I think he knew enough," I said, and chose not to know the rest. Lily nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'm okay." She said it twice, the way people do when they are telling themselves as much as anyone else. The gathering was on a Saturday afternoon, and the weather cooperated in the way that Tennessee weather sometimes does in spring, warm without being heavy, a good breeze off the water. Nicole wore a dress that was slightly too formal for a backyard party, which told me she had chosen it carefully. Derek stood near the grill and talked to the neighbors about football in the easy way he had always had with strangers. I waited until most people had arrived and the energy of the party was at its highest. Everyone comfortable. Glasses full. Guards down. I stepped up onto the deck and asked for a moment's attention. Nicole looked up from across the yard with a pleasant expression of curiosity. Derek turned from the grill. I said I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for coming, and to say a few things while I had everyone together. I said I had been fortunate in life to build something with my hands and my time, and that I had learned the hard way that the most important thing a man can protect is not his property, but his clarity, his ability to see things as they actually are. I said that my son and his wife had moved into my home under the assumption that I was an old man who could be managed. I said this without anger, simply as a statement of fact. I said that the paperwork Nicole had drafted for power of attorney was currently in the possession of my attorney. I said that the accounts Derek had opened, using my name, without my consent, had been flagged. I said that I had documentation, and that the appropriate people had received copies of that documentation, and that I hoped the neighbors would forgive a brief interruption to an otherwise pleasant afternoon. The man from the sheriff's department had arrived quietly 20 minutes earlier and was standing near the side gate. Nicole's face went through several things very quickly. Disbelief first, then a kind of recalculation, then something harder underneath that. She looked at Derek. Derek looked at me. And for a moment, just a moment, he looked exactly like the boy I had raised, the one who had stood in my shop with sawdust on his boots, learning how to measure twice and cut once. He looked young and frightened, and suddenly without the protection of the story he had been telling himself. "Dad," he said, "let's talk about this inside." "We're talking about it here," I said. Nicole attempted composure. She told the neighbors this was a family misunderstanding. She used the word misunderstanding 3 times. She took a step toward me and said, quietly but not quietly enough, that I was embarrassing myself. "Nicole," I said, "you have been in my home for 8 weeks, trying to take everything I spent 30 years building. I know every conversation you had about having me declared incompetent. I know about the facility. I know about the accounts." I paused. "I'm 63 years old. I bench press more than your husband. I remember every single thing I have ever been told. And I am not embarrassed at all. She was quiet after that. The deputy spoke to Nicole and Derek separately. Patricia joined them. I did not watch the conversations because I did not need to. I walked to the edge of the dock and stood there with Chester. While behind me, the party quietly rearranged itself, the way parties do when something real has happened. After a while, Lily came and stood beside me. "Is it over?" she asked. "The hard part is," I said. Derek came to find me as the last of the neighbors were leaving. He stood a few feet away, and he did not look like a man who expected forgiveness. He looked like a man who had finally stopped being surprised by his own choices. "I didn't know about the facility," he said. "You knew enough," I said. He was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry, Dad." I believed him. I also knew that being sorry and being trustworthy were not the same thing, and that I had learned that distinction late in life and intended to apply it. I told Derek that he was welcome to stay in Gatlinburg if he chose. There was a motel 20 minutes down the road. I would put him up for 2 weeks, and I would not interfere in whatever came next for him. I told him the house was no longer available to either of them. I told him I loved him and had never stopped, and that I also would not be managed, that those two things would have to coexist. Nicole was gone by evening. She left without speaking to me again. 2 of the boxes she packed were not her own, and Patricia's colleague walked her through returning them before she drove away. Derek stayed at the motel. He called me once a week for the next month. Short calls. Careful. Nothing asked for. I answered every one. It was a beginning of something I did not yet know how to name. Lily enrolled in the regional high school that fall. She signed up for 2 AP classes and a ceramics elective she had wanted to take for years, but had been talked out of by Nicole on the grounds of impracticality. On the first day, I drove her myself. She had her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness, and she was going to be extraordinary. And I had arrived in her life late, but I had arrived. That winter, she started asking questions about what I thought she might study in college. I told her I would not influence that choice. I told her the only opinion I had was that she should make it freely. Then I said, entirely casually, that whatever she decided, the tuition was taken care of. She looked at me for a long moment. She was not the kind of girl who cried easily. She cried then. In the evenings, I still go out to the back porch with my coffee. Chester is getting slower, but he still makes it to his spot by the railing. The oak trees have grown used to me. The water does what water does, and I sit with it and think about how a life can look completely different from the outside than it does from the inside. People who saw me in my 50s saw a man alone, a man whose family had left, a man running a small shop in the Tennessee heat for no particular audience. They did not see what I was building. I was not building furniture. The furniture was how I paid attention, how I stayed honest, how I practiced the discipline of making something real, from raw material that had no reason to become anything on its own. What I was building was harder to describe, but easier to keep. I was building a life that could not be taken from me because it was not made of things that could be taken. Nicole thought she was walking into a situation about money. She was partly right, but money was the smallest part of it. She was really walking into 17 years of a man learning who he was in the silence that other people's cruelty creates. She was walking into someone who had been underestimated for so long that he had made a quiet peace with it, who had stopped needing anyone to witness what he was becoming because he had learned to witness it himself. You do not recover from being cut off by the people you love. You do not recover and go back to what you were. You become something else. What you become depends on what you choose to do with the space where they used to be. I chose to fill it with work and with patience and with the knowledge that the truth is not always loud. Sometimes it is a man on a back porch watching the water, waiting for the right moment to lay down every card he has been holding for 17 years. The morning after the party, I woke up, and the knot in my chest was still gone. I made my coffee. I walked out to the dock. The light came off the water the way it does in spring. And Chester sat beside me. And somewhere in the house, I could hear Lily moving around, making breakfast, probably reading while her eggs cooked, the way she always did. 17 years is a long time to wait. It is not too long.